Hi, Dr. Dixon. This is Heidi McCurdy with my visual aids and my notes. All right. Whenever you hear the word burlesque, what do you think of? A beautiful woman doing a dance called striptease? But did you know that's not how burlesque got its start? As a huge fan of musical theater, I really enjoyed researching and reading about burlesque. So today I'd like to give you a brief history of burlesque from when it was introduced to our country in the 1860s, gained popularity in the early 20th century to its slow decline in the 1930s. So let's start by looking at how burlesque came to American theater. Burlesque arrived in 1868 with a theatrical troupe from England. And this is the lady that started it all. This is Lydia Thompson. She arrived in the United States with her group called the British Blondes. And according to Robert C. Allen in his book, Horrible Prettiness, they were the most thoroughly feminized form of theatrical entertainment in the history of American stage at the time. And they appealed, and were aimed actually at the middle and lower class audience and spoofed political and everyday topical material. And this is actually scantily clad for that time, being dressed in tights and showing up to the thigh, which was very scandalous for that day and age. And burlesque grew in popularity very quickly. And by the early 1900s, according to No Legs, No Chance, A History of American Musical Theater, burlesque became very empowering for women, especially during a time when women had no basic rights and they were fighting for them, like the right to vote and other rights at the time. But still being any women in any type of any acting things in the theater, where they were still considered very low and were considered being prostitutes. But according to Ann Curry in her biography, This Was Burlesque, burlesque may have been the lowest branch in the theater, but they were the limb nearest the people. They had very cheap, tickets were cheap, and so the mass appeal to a great deal of audiences, and that was the way that guys could see the girls. And it was a live show, which of course the guys really enjoyed that. The early performers paved the way for the new and more and the better burlesque performers that were to come. So now that we've seen how burlesque arrived in the United States and established itself in American theater, let's see how things changed in the early 20th century. By the early 1900s, vaudeville had died because of movies, but burlesque, that's when it really took off. It was the best form of live theater, and because of the girls. And that's when burlesque started to change. And no one knows exactly when the striptease actually came into vogue, but that's what all the guys wanted, obviously. They wanted to see more girls, and of course the performing and the joking with the comedians, that started to die off, and more stripping came in, and that's when the actual burlesque shows and the striptease really took off. And each girl then had to get their own gimmick. So by the 1920s, each one of the ladies each artist wanted to be an individual. And then that's when women like Gypsy Rose Lee, they would have their own, their costumes would be different, and their little stripping themes, as you would say. Gypsy Rose Lee was called a literary stripper, and she would recite humorous lines and tell elaborate jokes and not reveal too much skin until the end of her act. And another very famous burlesque performer at the time was Josephine Baker. And according to Amber Turner, a writer for World Press and a journalist student at Drexel University, Josephine Baker allegedly, Ernest Hemingway allegedly called her the most sensational woman anyone ever saw, and it's no wonder. She was a singer, a dancer, and an actress, and was known for appearing practically nude on stage, dancing around with bikinis made of bananas, and combining African and European dance styles to create energetic performances that few could match. Though she never quite had the same success here in the States that she had in France, Baker was one of the pioneers for black women in burlesque, which was quite different for the time. And another woman was Mae West. Not only was she a burlesque performer, but she had a 60-year career, and she wrote and directed and performed in theatrical plays on Broadway as well. Now that we saw how burlesque was in the 1920s, let's see what happened to burlesque into the 1930s and how it started to decline. By the 1930s, burlesque shows were getting rated more and more often because they started to get a little raunchier, less and less theatrics, and a lot more stripping. And Mayor LaGuardia, by 1937, had successfully shut down all of the burlesque houses. And by then, that was pretty much the end of burlesque. And now that we saw what happened to burlesque in the 1930s, and we saw that that was the end of the heyday of burlesque. And now that I've given you a brief history, this little narration about burlesque, it's actually having a bit of a resurgence now. And according to Wendy Rieger on NBC News report that I just heard, it's making a resurgence up and down the East Coast and in many cities. And I hope that after listening to this and you have a little bit more information, you probably maybe would like to be interested in going out for an evening and enjoying one of our country's oldest theatrical forms for yourself.
Very good.